Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are diving into something seriously unsettling. We're going to break down a collection of real, fully documented events where completely ordinary, everyday situations twisted into terrifying encounters with actual monsters. I'm absolutely fascinated by how a totally normal day can just turn on a dime, and we've put together these visual case files to walk you through exactly how these events unfolded. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's just jump right in and keep that suspense high.
So think about it. What actually happens when an ordinary day puts you right in the crosshairs of a real-life monster? It's a pretty provocative question, right? But it perfectly sets the stage for our anthology today. Because these aren't horror movies, we're talking about true accounts of people just trying to go to a school dance, drive home from church, or grab a drink on a first date. Let's open up our first case file and see how things can escalate from something seemingly innocent into something truly horrifying.
Case file number 1, a prom date with evil. We're heading back to Ohio in 1978. Picture this. 16-year-old Bridget is getting ready for a massive teenage milestone, the high school prom. She's going with a boy named Jeffrey. Now, she wasn't particularly thrilled about it, but he asked, and she really wanted to go. Well, it turned into an incredibly awkward, frankly disappointing date. Jeffrey showed up so nervous he was visibly shaking. He was wearing this strange vest and bow tie instead of a normal tux, and his hands were trembling so badly he couldn't even pin the corsage on her dress. Her mom actually had to step in and do it. And at the prom itself, he completely dished her to sit on a curb in the parking lot and eat McDonald's cheeseburgers. Just a totally weird, cringy night, right? Bridget just wanted to go home, and she basically never interacted with him again after that.
Now let's fast forward exactly 13 years to July 1991, up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A handcuffed man named Tracy Edwards frantically flags down local police, saying he was just held hostage. Minutes later, those officers are knocking on the door of the apartment Edwards escaped from, and they confront a man who calmly introduces himself as Jeffrey. But as this case unraveled, a horrific realization hit the police force. See, just 2 months prior to this exact night, officers had actually intercepted a drugged, bleeding boy fleeing this very same apartment. Jeffrey had smooth-talked the cops, convinced them it was just a minor lover's quarrel, and the police literally escorted the victim right back into Jeffrey's home. Because when police finally looked past Jeffrey that night in 1991, what they found was a literal house of horrors. They uncovered Polaroids of dismembered bodies just sitting out on a coffee table. They found several human heads stored away in the refrigerator and freezer. And in the bedroom, a 57-gallon drum filled with chemical-soaked, decomposing remains, right alongside undeniable evidence of cannibalism. The contrast between that awkward teenager eating cheeseburgers on a curb and this apartment is just staggering.
Which brings us to the terrifying reveal. Jeffrey, Bridget's nervous prom date, turned out to be none other than infamous serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Actually, just days after their awkward prom photos were snapped, Dahmer committed his very first murder, kicking off a 13-year spree that claimed 17 lives. He was hiding in plain sight the entire time.
All right, moving on to case file number 2, the Faceless Highway Encounter, set in Live Oak, Florida.
It's late at night, and a 16-year-old named Misty is riding down a totally desolate dirt highway with her mother, who already deals with some pretty severe night driving anxiety. First, while bombing down this pitch-black road, Misty spots a figure, what looks like a young girl with her knees tucked to her chest, just rocking on the side of the road. Reluctantly, her mom turns the truck around to check on her. They slow roll right past, but the girl completely ignores them, doesn't even flinch. So they lose sight of her in the dark and figure, okay, let's just go home. But then they hit an impossible reality. 2 or 3 miles down the road, sitting at a 4-way intersection, is that exact same girl. Same clothes, same position, rocking back and forth. Logically, geographically, it was physically impossible for her to have beaten them to that intersection.
At this point, Misty is in absolute hysterics. She's literally hiding down in the footwell of the truck, begging her mom not to stop. But her mother feels this overwhelming moral obligation, right? So she manually rolls down the passenger window to ask if the girl needs help. Instantly, the mother recoils in horror, screams, and just floors the gas pedal to get them out of there. Once they were safe, she told Misty she didn't have a face. It was completely hollow. And get this, despite police searching that entire stretch of highway that night, absolutely no trace of that entity was ever found.
Next up, case file number 3, the Tinder Catfish Trap, Colorado, 2018.
So this one involves a lonely 21-year-old rookie police officer named Derek. Following a rough breakup, Derek decides to give Tinder a shot, and he matches with a woman named Leah. They totally hit it off, and she suggests they meet up in her town for a date. The expectation here? A super romantic first date, stargazing in a beautiful, secluded park she recommended. But the reality? A meticulously planned trap. As Derek drives into the secluded area, this massive van is blocking the narrow access road. A huge guy steps out, claims he's the property caretaker, grills them for a second about being poachers, and then drives off. Huge red flag number 1.
A little while later, as Derek and Leah are sitting there stargazing, that same big van comes flying back down the hill and deliberately boxes Derek's car in. The so-called caretaker jumps out holding a metal pipe, demanding Derek's keys and wallet. But here is the ultimate betrayal. Leah, his date, stands up, casually walks over to the attacker, grabs a metal pipe of her own, and says, "Come on, give us your keys and wallet. We don't want to have to hurt you." Luckily for Derek, he was a trained cop with a concealed carry permit. He drew his pistol and sent both of them sprinting off into the woods.
Derek managed to speed out of that park and immediately called for backup. When police arrived and cleared that abandoned van, it became crystal clear that this wasn't just some random mugging. Inside, they found knives, handsaws, pistols, rifles, lighter fluid, chains, handcuffs, and duct tape. Oh, and the chilling cherry on top? When police went to investigate the hair salon where Leah supposedly worked, nobody there had ever seen or heard of her. She was a complete phantom, a con artist purposely luring men into the woods.
Okay, on to case file number 4. The Cemetery Bonfire Secret, taking us back to the 1990s. Best friends Rachel and Molly were totally into the 90s goth aesthetic, and they ironically liked to hang out in this specific, hidden, dead-end corner of a massive local cemetery. Just being edgy teenagers, right? Well, one Friday night, they're chilling in their spot when they suddenly smell smoke, and they notice the orange glow of a fire just over the crest of a nearby hill. At first, they assume it's just college kids from the university next door throwing a party, but then they start thinking, who throws a secret bonfire in a hidden cemetery corner in the middle of the night? It made absolutely no logical sense for college kids to haul a party out to furthest, most hidden corner away from campus.
Curiosity gets the better of them, and the girls decide to sneak up the hill to spy on the fire. But halfway up, they are hit with a putrid, overwhelming stench. I mean, so bad it literally makes them gag. Rachel immediately gets a terrible feeling in her gut and whispers that they need to leave right now. As they turn back toward their car, they glance up at the hill and see a man in his 40s. He's perfectly silhouetted by the fire, and he is staring directly down at them. Suddenly, the guy starts power walking and then full-on sprinting straight down the hill after them. The girls run for their absolute lives. They barely make it into Molly's car, locking the doors just as his head crusts the ridge behind them, and they speed off into the night.
Cut to the very next morning. Rachel is sitting in her kitchen when her mom comes in and delivers this absolutely horrific news. She says, "Someone I work with got kidnapped last night. The person killed her and then tried to dispose of her body at the cemetery by burning her in a bonfire." It hit Rachel with this sickening clarity. She and Molly had literally interrupted a killer actively burning a body. And that putrid smell? Yeah, it was exactly what you think it was. And that brings us to our final case file today. The Weepy-Voiced Killer, Twin Cities, 1980.
So, in the early 1980s, a string of brutal and seemingly random attacks on women absolutely gripped the Twin Cities area. It started on New Year's Eve 1980. Karen Potak gets into a car for a ride and is brutally bludgeoned with a tire iron. Miraculously, she survives, though with amnesia. 5 months later, 18-year-old Kimberly Compton is fatally stabbed with an ice pick. 6 months after that, 40-year-old Barbara Simons is stabbed and thrown into the Mississippi River. Finally, the killer targets a 19-year-old named Denise Williams, but Denise fights back viciously. Now, what truly connected all these crimes wasn't just the awful violence, it was this incredibly bizarre ritual the killer had.
See, after every single attack, the killer would actually call 911 himself. Listen to his exact words from the transcript. "Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did. I can't stop myself. I keep killing." He would literally weep and sob to the dispatchers on the phone, expressing this extreme, agonizing remorse, yet totally refusing to turn himself in or stop. The police eventually dubbed him the Weepy-Voiced Killer, and they even played his audio on local news stations, hoping anyone would recognize him.
So how do you finally catch a guy like this? Well, it's a crazy sequence of events. First, when he left a bar with his victim Barbara Simons, a really perceptive waitress just didn't like his vibe and burned his face into her memory.
She later identified 38-year-old Paul Stefani in a mugshot, which prompted police to put him under surveillance. Next, Stefani manages to ditch his police tail and he attacks Denise Williams. But as we mentioned, she fights back, and she actually slashes his face wide open with a glass bottle. And finally, bleeding heavily and desperate, Stefani calls 911 to get an ambulance for himself. The dispatcher on the other end instantly recognizes that famous weepy voice. Cops swooped in, arrested him right in his hospital bed, and he was eventually sentenced to 58 years in prison.
Well, that wraps up our explainer for today. And honestly, it leaves us all with a pretty terrifying question. How well do you truly know the people crossing your path every single day? A nervous prom date, a polite stranger in a park, a guy offering a ride in the cold. True horror doesn't always announce itself with a scary soundtrack, you know? Sometimes it just patiently waits in the most mundane, everyday moments of our lives. I really hope this deep dive gave you a structured, eye-opening look at these incredible true stories. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this source material today. Stay safe out there, and remember, always trust your instincts.